David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that speaker who just sat down did not address the issue that many New Zealanders are thinking about at the moment, and that is our sending our troops and our forces into harm's way into Iraq. And when you look at what has happened over the last months, the months of being able to respond to this, it is a utter muddle. And what we know is that the government has already taken a decision on this issue, and is arrogantly allowing New Zealanders to think that somehow it's still considering its options. Sir, training has been going on for months, and this week Jerry Brownlee rather arrogantly said that somehow that there was going to be some preliminary training for a possible deployment in Iraq. His office told us that in December last year. Last year we knew what the training was for, and this week we get told by Jerry Brownlee that actually he's made a decision around that. Sir, the government cannot continue to fool the country on an issue as serious as that. But to beat that, sir, was Murray McCulley's comments today on radio and what he is actually saying about us deploying into Iraq. There has been no government-to-government discussions about deployment in Iraq held up till now. We have been training for 3 months, but there has been no discussion with the Iraqis about putting our troops on their soil, helping them out, or even asking them of whether they actually want New Zealand forces to be there. In fact, he went on to say to journalists, that has actually been done by the US and Australia on our behalf. Now, sir, this is really about what John Key admitted into a BBC interview as about being part of the club. This is not about making a real difference. It is being part of that club, being a club of the willing that want to go in there. And of course, the US and Australia, who are already there, want us to be part of their club. And the UK, their Foreign Secretary was here last week, Mr. Speaker, and he too wanted New Zealand to be part of that club. And when I asked the UK Foreign Secretary how many troops they have on the ground, how many troops are they planning to deploy, the answer is none. 0. They do not want to put troops on the ground because they believe it's politically untenable in Britain. Why? Because, sir, they realise that after 10 years of putting troops on the ground there, they do not want to make and go down that same route again. That's, sir, when you look at the legacy, the history of Western involvement in the Middle East, it turns out to be not a pretty history. Yet, sir, we are making that decision on behalf of New Zealanders. We've already made that. It's been done. It's all been wrapped up. We've had our meetings with our particular club, and we will be putting troops in on the ground as a result of that. And what's changed, because John Key realises that the club conversation isn't working, is that for the first time, I have heard John Key address himself to human rights. Suddenly, human rights is being pulled out of the drawer, and human rights is being used as the justification of why we need to be in Iraq. Well, sir, human rights violations are occurring right across the world, certainly in Iraq, and what's been going on by Islamic State is barbaric and it's horrible. But it's also happening in Boko Haram, and oddly enough, it's also happening in Sri Lanka, a country where we learned this week Prime Minister Key invited the President, Rajapaksa, to come to New Zealand to visit. on this formal visit. This is a man who presided over 50,000 Tamils being killed, who has not done any investigation into that issue, and yet John Key, standing up for human rights in one situation, conveniently ignoring human rights in another. Sir, what New Zealanders want when we are thinking about going into a war zone and a conflict zone, and don't believe that we'll be operating behind the wire and therefore everything will be okay and it'll be risk-free. That is not the case and not the situation that has been experienced by any trainer in the Middle East or Afghanistan. Casualties have occurred, many casualties have occurred behind the so-called wire, whatever that wire might be. But so what we expect and what New Zealanders do expect, and the Labour Party and the Labour government has committed troops into conflicts before, but what we expect is a sound analysis and a sound rationale for why we want to be there. And I don't believe that this government has answered the hard questions that we expect to be answered. And what's going to happen is that 2 years down the track, we're going to be saying, why are we there and what is the purpose of us being there, sir? And here are some of the questions. Can we make a difference? Surely that is a question that we've got to ask ourselves. Can we make a difference? The United States spent $25 billion over 10 years at the cost of scores, if not hundreds, of its soldiers, training the Iraqi army, only to find that they did not succeed, did not stand up the first time that they went into battle. Now, much of that problem wasn't to do with the training. Much of that problem was to do with the fact that the political environment had undermined and hollowed out that military. But that's what I mean, sir. What can we do, putting a Band-Aid over something like that, that will make a real difference to the Iraqis and to the Iraqi armed forces? Sir, what is the risk? What is the assessment of that risk to New Zealand? I don't believe that we've done that. We are gung-ho about going in. The Australians went in without being asked. Actually, they positioned their forces outside of Iraq without being asked, and then tried to ask their way in. Of course they want us to be there. They want to be supported. They want another flag up the pole. The question is, what are the risks to our soldiers? And I don't believe that has been answered. What is the exit strategy? How do we know when this mission is complete? So we sent troops into Bamiyan with a very clear set of instructions. This government eventually pulled them out after believing that what we had done and the mission that we had set out to achieve had been completed as far as we could. That's not the case in this situation, sir. The US is just asking for a 3-year commitment to put more troops on the ground. That, sir, looks to me like a slippery slope that we are embarking on without an exit strategy. What is the risk to ordinary New Zealanders, the Kiwis right across this country, of Islamic State and the radicalisation that is happening by becoming engaged in a conflict like Iraq? That hasn't been assessed. That has certainly not been assessed. What is the risk to New Zealanders here and abroad from us being more involved in this conflict? And what is the cost, sir? Another question, what is the cost of that involvement to putting 100-odd New Zealand troops on the ground, and how could we better use that money? What are the opportunity costs? And sir, what is the opportunities in humanitarian assistance, in standing beside some of the organisations and the local authorities and governments that are desperately trying to address the real underlying issues that are causing the conflict in Iraq to start with? The economic issues, the capacity issues within the government that have allowed that military to fall apart. Those are issues where we could actually really make a difference, I believe, sir, and we haven't been able to address those at all. And lastly, sir, here at home, what are we doing to address the possible radicalisation of young Muslims in particular on the ground? Sir, everybody that I have met have seen has told me that that simply is not happening. And yet when we look at risks to New Zealand, those are the risks that we need to address, that we are simply not doing, and instead we're going and embarking on a military adventure to join a club.
The next call is a split call. Ian McKelvey, 5 minutes.